So now let's see how you might want to approach playing a bass line with the pads in regular note mode. So first off, the default mode for pads is fourths, meaning fourth intervals from one row to the next. Just to make it a bit simpler at first, I'll hit the scale button and then change it to sequential. This just stacks up each octave on top of each other, meaning the pads just play ascending notes as you go up each row. And so we've got each note in the scale going up octaves on each column now. The other option is thirds, so jumping in third intervals as we go up and down. We'll come on to some of the advantages of this shortly, but for now let's go back to the default fourth. With this mode we get a larger range than thirds, with the 64 pads covering 4 octaves. With both thirds and fourths though, the bottom and top rows play a full octave, from one tonic note to the next. The difference, however, comes when playing the scale as the hand moves up. After all, it's a bit difficult playing one octave without resorting to piano tactics of tucking the thumb under. So the advantage with the pads is that you can move upwards like this. So in fourths mode, you can play 3 notes each row to go up through the scale. So you can just use 3 fingers to play ascending runs of notes in key anywhere on the grid, going between blue pads if you want to start and end on the tonic. Now bass lines are often best when simple, so you might not want to play that many additional notes and could just stick mainly on the tonic. Maybe adding a second degree at certain moments. And other common notes for bass lines are the 5th degree, so 5th note in the scale, and also the octave, so the tonic note an octave up, which can be played with the 5th, although I often prefer the 7th in this context as it makes it a bit more interesting. And although I'm using 2 hands for this, just to make it easy for you to see what notes in the scale I'm playing, and also to show you another way to play it, you can of course just use 1 hand to play it. And if you want to check what the notes are, then you can play them on the lower octave and see them go green on the rows above, so I can quickly remind myself where the 5th and 7th notes are. Instead of just jumping to the 5th, we could play the 4th note too, maybe sliding up to the 5th, or occasionally down to the 4th. And it can also be nice to use the 7th in a similar way, to slide up to the octave. And we could extend this even further by going up to the rows above. So this 4th interval is actually really good for bass lines, as you can hear. Let's maybe try a funky run like this in the phrase. The reason this mode is particularly good for bass lines is it's like playing the different strings of a guitar. So if you're familiar with guitar playing, then you might know if you're playing a riff on the 1st string. In fact, if I hit the E button in scale mode, so we're actually in E, then this is similar to playing the E string. Then moving up to the A string, and back to E, then going to the 5th, then the 4th, then back down to the tonic. So this is a 12-bar blues progression. And if I simplify it to just the first 3 notes, rather than 1, 3 and 4, then I can apply exactly the same rules, just shifting up to the same starting note for the phrase. Here though, on the 5th, I'd quite like to play a different note for the middle one, as it doesn't sound quite right. And this is what you might find occasionally when transposing a phrase like this to different notes in the scale. And the solution is to change to chromatic mode. When I do this, I now get all available MIDI notes, so can see notes outside of the scale rather than just the ones in the key I'm in, which are these darker pads. But I can still see the notes in the scale, they're just spaced a bit further apart now, so I can still play the same phrase as before. Only now, when I get to the one starting on the 5th, I can play the accidental note that I wanted, rather than being forced to play the one in the scale. Lastly, if you wanted to play your own arpeggiated bass lines, which is when you play the notes in a chord one after the other, normally notes 1, 3 and 5, or maybe the octave 2, which is like a full arpeggio, then doing it with one hand on a horizontal row like this is maybe the best way. However, if you wanted to stick to the 3-finger technique playing different rows, then you'd have to play in a slightly different order, going 1, 3, 2, 3 with the fingers. Unless you were playing the Riders on the Storm bass line. Or in full. Although I actually need to be in the Dorian scale for this one. But going back to a straight arpeggio, this is where the different pad modes can come in handy. For instance, changing to thirds now, the scale goes up with just 2 fingers. So notes 1, 3 and 5 in the scale are on top of each other, making it nice and easy to play an arpeggio. And if I wanted to really mix things up, I could change the pads to horizontal, which is like rotating the entire grid. So now the scale goes up the left, or with 2 fingers along the bottom. So now the thirds are going along the bottom, so the arpeggio can be played horizontally rather than vertically. So it's perhaps the easiest way to play arpeggios up through the scale. And you can create some really interesting phrases with this.